Warning, I'm not a professional game designer or a story writer, just a guy who's been pondering a lot. I'm sure we all have characters we've attached ourselves to over the years, but have you ever just wondered why? I've been playing a lot of 1v1 fighters lately, and I've been wondering what makes me like certain characters more than others. In video games, we experience characters' actions differently than we do in other mediums. The result is, many times it isn't important whether or not a character is interesting, but whether or not we can easily attach ourselves to their in-game actions. Projection is always going to be a big part of video game characters. That is, projecting who you are onto a character you can relate to visually or otherwise, or projecting yourself into a role you want to be in. Anyway, I've broken what makes a character attachable into 4 categories. Remember, attachment, not likability or how interesting they are, even though that can be part of it. Also remember that a single aspect can be expressed in 2 or more forms. For me, in order of least important to most important, what makes one get attached to a character is their outward appearance, what they say, what they do, and finally their background or current story. Art design is a bit specific in video games. Characters need to be instantly recognizable from a distance and have a striking enough presence not to be confused with somebody else. For example, if Kitana is your opponent in Mortal Kombat, you need to apply a different strategy than if your opponent were, say, Mileena. But because both characters look somewhat similar, you could instinctually use the wrong strategy. When it comes to how attached you are to a character, though, this is very subjective, as are the rest of the categories, since whatever everyone likes is always different. It can be as simple as, I like their design, or they stand out. And I'm sure when it comes to this category, some people's immediate response is, I attach myself to this character because she has double Ds and doesn't afraid to show them. That can be one way of liking a character through their appearance, but here's one of my preferences. I love it when a character is very visually functional. What I mean by that is I like it when a character's outfit just feels like there is a use for every little thing in it. I always love the idea of seeing people make the most out of everything they have, and it's a good way to reflect on their backstory through a visual action. A good example is Crimson Viper, where the entire outfit is intended to be an advanced piece of tech designed to take someone down in a fight. For a lot of people, projection is very important here. I'm sure there are more than a few people who pick the character that most resembles themselves or represents a form they would like to have. This may be a little bit of a tangent, but the argument that men's characters are just as sexualized as female characters because they are ridiculously ripped is faulty because they are designed for player projection. No, they probably don't look like you, but I bet you want to look just as intimidating or as powerful. Anyway, on to words. Originally, I was just going to lump words and actions into one category, personality. But then I realized that in video games, characters' actions are particularly important as they are what the player does to influence the character. Words can always make you interpret characters different, even if it isn't part of a larger grand scheme, although that usually is the case.
Ghost?
I always love characters who have a good sense of determination or humor. If you look at a guy like Johnny Cage in Mortal Kombat 9, he says nothing but things that are so conceited and self-absorbed that he's actually pretty funny to listen to.
And I'm taking you down, I'm taking you down, I'm taking you out, I'm taking you out, and I'm taking you out for dinner.
For me, that can be the kind of thing that gets me attached to a character. This is sort of an extension of both story and the character's actions, but it can make or break a character at times. For example, I didn't really care about Zangief and actually liked Chun-Li in the original Street Fighter 2, but when both of them started talking in Street Fighter 4, I lost interest in Chun-Li after all her dialogue and speaking was so enthusiastic, and liked Zangief for his humorous lines in the story mode.
Fighting is the best thing to do when life gets you down. Alright, I am going to help you out.
Huh?
In video games, the action, or interaction, is where the player comes in. And because of this, what you do as the player can ultimately make you attached to the character. For example, Samus as a character had very little story, but because her actions in the game reflected a strong will and independence, you could become very attached to a character if those actions feel meaningful for you. A more personal action style I love is when a character displays a certain grace and elegance to what they do. I remember getting attached to both Chun-Li in Street Fighter 2 and Ada Wong in Resident Evil 4 because I love their graceful style of movement. This is also a big place of where projection is a huge part of where you get attached to a character. If you play a game where your options of play are open-ended like most fighting games, a character who has a fighting style that reflects your playing style can be very easy to get attached to. A different example of this is in Silent Hill, where in story mode, Harry Mason is kind of stupid, but because he's with you as you play the game, acting as your avatar in the game, he can be very easy to get attached to if it's an experience you feel scared in, because hey, he stuck with you through all that crazy stuff that was going on. Finally, there's story, and this one is rather basic. If a character's background or ongoing story interests you, you can get attached to that character. For example, I thought Kanji's inner conflict in Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4 was very interesting, so I became attached to the character pretty much based on the interest of that alone. However, I don't think it's simply limited to in-game story, because there are stories outside of the game that can spark enough interest to make a character attachable to. A character can have an interesting backstory behind their development, like Balrog pretty much being Mike Tyson. A character can have an interesting discussion about who or what they truly are, such as Poison from Final Fight concerning her gender. Or they can have an aspect about their character that you immediately gravitate towards, like how I almost always play the wrestling characters because I'm such a giant wrestling fan. Of course, it can always be just as simple as, I loved the game so much that I played it over and over again. And when you spend a lot of time with a character, you'll probably get attached to them sooner or later. So there's the individual aspect based on what gets me attached to a certain character. Remember, my order is based on what gets me attached to characters more and more. I've heard other people say visual design is almost 100% of why they pick a character. I'll go through certain characters that many people attach themselves to because of several of these factors. Dante in Devil May Cry 4 fits these qualities pretty well. A striking visual design that allows Dante to stand out from his grim and drab environment, setting up the projection that the character is important and by extension, the player. Everything he says and everything he does is intended to grab your attention and show how important and fun he is. And even his place in the grim and gritty story contrasts so much that he can't help but grab the spotlight. If he fits the style you like, he can be very easy to get attached to. The God of War games are basically meant to just make you feel powerful, and it fits well that Kratos is basically the Hulk, except somehow even more monstrous. His visual design is bare and animalistic, and everything he says is an unintelligible roar, fitting his savage fighting style and creating a perfect visual projection for which players can therapeutically act out their inner rage. The first game put up a decent setup to understand his nature, justifying Kratos' actions to himself and hopefully by extension, the player. Again, when you go through something truly intense, you can get attached to a character. I've also heard similar things about James Sunderland in Silent Hill 2, strangely enough. The ordinary guy image, words, and backstory fit easy for simple projection, and from what I've heard, the story is so instinctually based that pretty much anyone can therapeutically experience it. It's easy to get attached to people when they were with you during the horrors. What are some characters you've really gotten attached to? They don't even have to be from video games. I would prefer it to see what really gets people invested in game characters, since they are so often blank slates who do whatever the game feels is necessary. Here's some characters that I've really gotten attached to, a couple from outside of video games. Mario for his colorful look and all the games I've played with him. Dan in Street Fighter 4 for his funny fighting style, charismatic appearance, and for the interesting story about his development. Undertaker in WWE for his dark style, excellent wrestling ability, and because he seems like a very nice guy backstage. The boss in Metal Gear Solid 3 for her authoritative actions against both enemies and allies, her fascinating contemplative lines, and her interesting relationship with everyone around her. And Black Cat for her charming personality, humor, and interesting relationship with Spider-Man. Thanks for watching, and if you think I'm totally wrong, share your opinion about what makes you attach to certain characters. I'm not a professional, and I'm sure most of you aren't either, and I'd love to spur a discussion about what makes characters easy to get attached to. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this.